My talk today is entitled Impacts of Diesel Cost on Owner-Operator Log Truck Drivers in the Western Gulf. Logging is extremely important to forestry, and without the ability to harvest and receive some revenue, landowners basically can't practice forestry. With rising fuel costs, insurance, and inflation in general, logging operations are becoming even more financially strained than they were in the past, particularly the trucking component. Thus, it's important that log truck drivers receive adequate compensation given their costs and efforts, and that the public in general understands the importance of trucking to the logging operation and ultimately then to forestry and to the mills. There are two types of trailers that you'll find here commonly in Mississippi, and that's a 4-bolster trailer and a pole trailer. 4-bolster trailers generally weigh from 8,700 to 14,000 pounds depending on the year it was produced, the manufacturer. And pole trailers, as you can see, weigh from around 6,000 to 8,000 pounds for obvious reasons. For this analysis, we'll assume a 4-bolster trailer that weighs 10,000 pounds empty, or you could say unladen or tier, when there's no payload or logs in the trailer. And then you can talk about the truck or cab or tractor, as they say. These can generally weigh from 15,000 to 25,000 pounds. Here's a day cab and then a sleeper cab. So you can imagine that sleeper is going to add additional weight. And there's other things that can add weight as well. But this impacts, right, both the weight of the trailer when empty and the weight of the truck can impact the amount of payload per haul. And so that can impact the revenues to a log truck driver ultimately. And for this analysis, we're going to assume a day cab that weighs 19,000 pounds. Then we can talk about maximum gross vehicle weight, GVW. And beginning in July of 2023 for Mississippi, the max GVW is going to go up from 84,000 pounds to 88,000 pounds. And we're going to assume the maximum gross vehicle weight is 88,000 pounds. Thus, if we have 19,000 pounds for a day cab, cab, and then 10,000 pounds for the 4-bolster trailer, right? That's 29,000 pounds, leaving then 59,000 pounds for the payload, right? The amount of logs, the weight of the logs on the truck per haul on the tractor trailer, and thus that's 29.5 tons. You divide 59,000 by 2,000. And this analysis is focused only on owner-operator log truck drivers. These are drivers that own their own trucks, their own tractor cab, and their own trailer, and they pay all of the associated costs, such as any notes for the purchase of those vehicles, the title, the fuel, which, right, this is what this analysis is about, the diesel cost, insurance, maintenance, professional training that may be required, plus a salary and fringe benefits to themselves, such as health, right, health insurance, dental insurance, retirement, as opposed to being employed directly by a mill or by a logging operation. Thus, these log truck drivers then will often contract out with either the mill or with the logger. And the owner-operators are often paid by an approach using the dollars per ton per loaded mile. So first we can see here, so here we have this is a plantation being harvested, and you can see the fellow buncher is around here, the one felling the trees. Then you have these skidders that are bringing the trees from the harvest, the felling point, to the processing central processing place, or the landing we'll call it, right? And then here the logs are cut up, the tops are removed, the limbs are removed, they're cut up, bucked up into various lengths and to diameters and for whatever mills they're going to, and then they're loaded onto the truck. And so here's this truck. And so we're assuming this truck here is an owner-operator, kind of an independent driver, and they're contracting out with this logger who owns all this equipment. And so they're getting paid on the dollar per ton per loaded mile approach. Thus, there's more revenue to the truck driver the greater the weight and the longer the haul. And so here's loaded. This is what we mean by loaded mile. The truck driver is only getting paid for the loaded mile approach, at least directly. And it's therefore when they're unloaded, right, they're technically not being paid. So basically they're getting paid for the trip from the harvesting operation to the mill, and then on the return trip they're not getting paid for that. And we're not going to get too deep into this, but there's often two components to this payment method per ton per loaded mile, a minimum haul rate and an incremental haul rate. And for this, we're just going to assume the minimum haul rate of 40 miles and that the haul is 40 miles. And so that's another component that really we don't have time to get into for this talk. So here's the formula for revenue per load, right? The minimum haul distance, which in this case is 40 miles times the tons of payload times the minimum haul rate. And so you can see that the longer the haul is and the greater the tons, the weight of the payload, the more the driver is going to get paid, particularly when you include this incremental haul distance in here. But for this presentation, we're just going to assume the haul distance is 40 miles and that the minimum haul distance is 40 miles. So basically then they're just going to get paid 40 miles times 29.5 tons times the minimum haul rate, which is going to vary. And as I said, for this analysis, it's assumed that the driver already owns the truck and trailer, so there's really no notes or payments on the vehicles. And there's 4 costs per gallon of diesel. This is the analysis, right? How does these different costs of diesel impact the annual net revenues to a driver? And here's what I said, the dollar per ton per loaded mile, right? Going to vary from 0.13 cents to 0.23 cents by 2 cents. So basically then, right, the logger, or the truck driver, I should say, is going to get paid 40 miles times 29.5 tons per load that he's hauling times one of these revenues per ton per loaded mile. And we're going to assume, as I said, 88,000 pounds, thus there's going to be 29.5 tons of payload per haul. Annual insurance is assumed to cost $10,000, thus we're assuming at this current time that this driver actually has some experience. The woods weight mill rate are both assumed to be 30 minutes, so 60 minutes in total per haul trip. And so this is what we're saying, for example, this is the mill weight. Okay, they're waiting to get unloaded. They got to go through the scale house, and so that's actually going to impact the driver revenue, because remember, if they're paid per ton per loaded mile, right, they're not really getting paid for this. They're just kind of sitting there and waiting. And that's the same thing on the woods weight too. I guess I can go back here real quick. Often in the woods, right, there'll be another truck waiting, or right, even if there's not another truck, they're waiting to get loaded. They just don't show up and the logs automatically get on there, poof, on the trailer. So they got to wait on that. And then there's usually some type of delays, in-route delays, maintenance delays. So thus in total, there's 90 minutes per trip, per haul, for loading, unloading, and delays. And then we also have costs for licensing, ad valorem taxes, and heavy use tax. And so we're going to assume the driver is working 51 weeks per year, 5 days a week, 10 hours per day, right? Minimum haul distance of 40 miles. The haul distance is 40 miles, so there's no incremental income. And here's the haul distance. And I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but right, these different road types are going to impact the travel speed and the travel time, and then the fuel per gallon, miles per gallon. And so, right, the more you travel on a forest road or gravel county road as opposed to like a paved 4-lane road, right, that's going to add more time, because you got to go slower on those roads. And then the federal interstates, they have restrictions on the maximum GVW that you can have, 80,000 pounds generally, right? So they're not generally going to travel on the interstate loaded, but you will see them more often when they're unloaded. And thus, the total haul time per haul is 3.2 hours. So if they're working 10 hours per day and each haul takes 3.2 hours, well, then that's going to come up, I think, to 3.16, 3.2 hauls per day. And then we get into maintenance costs. And once again, I don't have time to get deep into this, but basically this is an approach used by people in the past. You have these costs assumed per mile for brakes, tires, normal weight maintenance, and minor repair. And you can see that, once again, as I mentioned before, right, depending on the road type that you're driving, the length, you're going to have probably a greater impact on that truck. You can imagine that truck driving down a 4-lane paved highway is probably going to have a little less wear and tear in certain aspects than that truck driving down a logging road, where you got bumps and it's not very well kept. So there's a difference there, or at least it's not paid per se, I should say. So for this analysis, right, depending on these parameters, there's 806 hauls annually, given the mileage and the assumed hours working annually. Here's the per load cost that are coming in from the maintenance, the fuel, and then the insurance. And so we're assuming $10,000 annually in insurance, and it can be up to $22,000 often for a more inexperienced or brand new drivers. So once again, these are things that we need to think about when we're looking at these at logging operations and the importance of them to forestry and the local economies and state and regional and national and really global economies. Then here's your annual cost, and so then that dollar per ton per loaded mile is going to, the difference between these costs and that revenue is going to be the annual net revenue. And then here's the Pereira's performance measures, and I don't have time to go deep into this, but here's the trips per day worked, 3.16, based on basically a total trip time of 3.2 hours, which is kind of weird. And trips per week, around 16, the number of trips per year. And then here's your various costs. You can see there's quite a bit of difference, annual cost, based on the cost of the gallon of diesel. And so that can impact the annual net revenues. And here's the annual net revenue by cost of diesel per gallon. And then your dollar per ton loaded mile. Remember I said 0.13 cents by 0.23 cents is the salary that driver is going to get. So once again, generally, the longer the haul and the more tonnage that you have, the higher this annual net revenue is going to be, but that can obviously create some issues as well if it gets too much. But you can definitely see an impact on the revenue received as well as the cost of diesel on the annual net revenue. So increases in diesel cost per gallon can have a large impact on owner-operator annual cost and hence their annual net revenues. And as I mentioned, inexperienced drivers will pay higher annual insurance costs, and this, of course, will reduce further the net revenues. I showed the $22,000 annually. So just things to think about when we're thinking of rules and codes and legislation, trying to help these loggers to make sure that these guys are safe in their hauls. The loggers are safe, making sure, as well as that these guys are driving newer vehicles. You can imagine, those costs are becoming so high when you have diesel going up, inflation, insurance going up. Well, generally they're probably going to buy or use older vehicles, They're not going to buy new vehicles. They're just going to keep their vehicle that they've had in the past, maybe 10, 15, 20 years old, maybe even sometimes 30-year-old vehicles. And so once again, everybody, we have to think about these things in terms of public safety as well as their own safety in some of the legislation that we may pass, and making sure that they can make a revenue, a reasonable salary, as well as making sure that they're safe on the road for the general public. Thank you.